Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can I welcome you to Worcester Rugby Club on a lovely spring morning. I was going to say summer's morning. Somebody's already reminded me that we met last June when we had the emergency budget, and of course the weather was awful. So here we are in March, beautiful day. I can imagine a few of you are bursting to get out onto the golf course, seeing as that's probably where you spend most of your time. Before we start, what I'd like to do, if I may, is an appeal. We want your bras. Awfully sorry, but we want your bras. You know, what we're doing is we're collecting ladies' bras to help the attempt on the longest bra chain in the world record, which is taking place at Worcester Racecourse in July. We have a box at the back, a pink box at the back of the room where we are collecting. We've collected a load towards the for the event, and we want even more. So please donate any unused, any old bras that you have. And just looking around the room, I see one or two of the men probably have got a few of their own. Haven't you, Bob? Thank you, Bob. I didn't quite know what to call today's presentation, so I decided I'd open with the headline off yesterday's Daily Star, which I thought was so inappropriate for the day. It's the 12th annual Crowther Beard budget breakfast briefing. This is one of the longest running breakfast briefings probably in the West Midlands, and certainly the longest running in Worcester. And the Chancellor... Which one's the version? Chris? The Chancellor called it a plan for growth. And I'm delighted to say today, not only is Chris Hobbs, my tax partner, going to be speaking, but also we're delighted we've got Mike Ashton, the Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce in Herefordshire and Worcestershire, here to give a business perspective a bit later on. It was a second budget for George. Wonderful for him. He's now given 3 speeches on the economy, although I think Chris probably will dispute it's just 3. But he said it was, the one thing I picked out was the urgent call for action from Britain. So I thought of Kitchener. We need you. Come on, let's get some action together, he was saying. He then went on to basically devise a 4-tenanted approach. Firstly, that we have the most competitive tax system in the G20. Then that we're the best place in Europe to start, finance and grow businesses, to encourage investments and exports as a route to more balanced economy, and to create a more educated workforce that is the most flexible in Europe. And we've decided that the way to do the presentation was probably to build up around those four key areas. But to start with, let's have a look at the economy and look at some of the background to where we are at this time. Chancellor, for a number of years, various chancellors, Gordon Brown, Alistair Darling, and now George Osborne, are saying we need a strong and stable economy. And we know where Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling were taking us. Only this month, the OECD has conducted a survey of the UK economy and has concluded in that the global financial crisis and the associated recession ended a 15-year period of continuous growth, rising employment and stable inflation. Significant imbalances have developed, however, in terms of public and external deficits, an excessively leveraged financial sector, high house prices and low household savings. The imbalances exacerbated the downturn during the global recession and contributed to a more pronounced fall in GDP, a larger fiscal deficit and higher inflation than most of the OECD. In other words, we haven't got a strong and stable economy. In fact, the economy now is 10% lower, smaller, than had been predicted in 2008. So what does the Chancellor now think? In terms of growth, we obviously had the shrinking of the economy in 2009, some growth in 2010. But in November, he was forecasting just over 2% growth in 2011. That now looks like it's going to shrink, and we're going to do about 1.7%. 2012, again, his forecast has slightly been downgraded. But 2013, 2014, 2015, the feeling is that the growth will be slightly greater than had originally been predicted. Of course, this gave Ed Miliband an opportunity to have a dig. Probably the only opportunity he had to dig. Maybe somebody ought to point out that Labour's forecasts weren't very good either. Inflation. The Bank of England, you may recall, works on a magical 2% inflation. Now, CPI, Consumer Price Index, is currently expected to run at around about 3.9% this year. However, they do expect things to come down, because they're saying that the argument being is that inflation at the moment is being fueled by world food prices, commodity prices, and by the oil price. That is outside the control, and therefore will drop back later in the year. And I think that that's where, from an economist's perspective, we will get back towards the 2% inflation target. Borrowing. If you recall, 12 months ago we were being told that borrowing was going out of control. We were going to be one of the poorest countries because of the excessive borrowing that we were doing. But forecasts are slightly lower now than they were even in November for the current year. Slightly increased for next year and the year after. And it looks like we're still going to be borrowing quite a large sum of money every year. And unemployment also is expected to remain quite high, and certainly higher than the original forecast. Again, world economic conditions dictating that. Interestingly, one of the comments that's being made is that other countries that did not address their deficits quickly enough, such as Ireland and Portugal, have seen their debt ratings downgraded, borrowing costs sky high. So it's important that the government are tackling the debt position within the economy. As I said, one of the 4 areas of growth that the governments are looking towards is to create the most competitive tax system in the G20. This is an ideal opportunity for Chris to get to work with some of the tax details.
Right, I mugged up on the book that arrived 10 minutes ago, so I know all areas in the budget now. Those of you who were here last year will remember me apologising that I wasn't able to emulate the diction, the clear diction of a lecture I went to this time last year. Well, again I went to a lecture earlier this week, but this time I didn't waste my time listening to the speaker and what they had to say, with apologies to Francesca Lagerberg. I concentrated on the important thing, which was to actually get some good ideas for today. Because of that, I'm able to come up with this good picture of Bill Murray, groundhog, because tax was very much like a groundhog. For those of you who remember the film, groundhog was basically you woke up every day and the day was the same as the previous day. And it was like that in tax. You woke up every morning, the next day was a finance bill. You woke up, next day, a finance bill. The next day, a finance bill. Now, when George Osborne had the emergency budget, George International Rescue Osborne had the emergency budget, he said, I'm going to change all that. We're going to plan what we're going to do in the future. We're not going to suddenly go off and kind of have the usual routine of a pre-budget, an autumn statement in December normally. I've never quite followed that, but we were going to get away from that, followed by a budget in March, and then a headlong rush to get all the legislation together for a finance bill to be published and then debated, end up in the Finance Act, all published by the 1st of August. So it was in the tax would lapse. So he said, I'm going to get away from this. We're going to do away with the autumn statement. We're actually going to publish what we're going to do, so that people have got a lot of time to think about it before we actually deal with the Finance Act. And the Finance Act will actually be published next week, next Thursday, 31st of March. Yeah, that is Thursday. So then that got me thinking that a statement, one of my favourite quotes by a chap called Rumsfeld, sorry, that's not his picture. That's his picture. And he came up with probably I think the quote of the decade. There are known unknowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That's to say, we know there are some things we do not know. There are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. And one commentator actually said that that was making a very complicated subject quite simple. Not to me. Anyway, so then I thought, well, we do know some known unknowns. These are the things that they've talked about, and there's bound to be some known unknowns, things we know they're going to announce this time in the budget, but also there might be a few surprises. So let's deal with the known unknowns. In October they announced there's going to be some big pension changes. Later in October they announced the bank levy details. And this is where Groundhog Day comes in again. You'll see the bank levy has changed umpteen times. November they talked about corporate tax reform. November review of alcohol taxation, which is low and high strength beers. Rates and thresholds were announced on the 2nd of December. And on the 9th of December we had a load of draft finance bill clauses, which I'll come on to in a minute. On the 14th of December, they remind us of the VAT changes that were happening in January 2011. 8th of February, further changes to the bank levy, because they then got it quite right, and he's done some more this time in the budget. 9th of March, they announced some anti-avoidance regarding leasing. So okay, let's have a quick jog through the draft legislation. The first one on restricting the pension relief, I think, okay, it's not very welcome, but it's well known that he's going to reduce the annual allowance to £50,000, but he's going to give make available a carry forward for up to 3 years, and next year we'll see a reduction in the lifetime allowance from 1.8 million to 1.5 million. There were other pension changes. Perhaps the most welcome of these was the end of the need to purchase an annuity at age 75. So, that's quite good. More change on the back side. That was the draft legislation on bank levy, amending the legislation he'd already issued, which is amended again this time. And what's the bet to amend it again before next Thursday? Corporate tax rates and reform, reduction in written down allowance and annual investment allowance for capital allowances. The annual investment allowance at the moment is 100,000. That's from April it go down to 25,000, which is basically the amount that you can write off against tax when you buy capital equipment. If you're not able to write everything off in the first year, then you get a written down allowance, which next year is going to reduce from, well, you get various rates. At the moment it's 20 or 10. It will be 18 or 8 after April, from April. Associated company rules. Before companies were associated and so forth, they split the tax bands between themselves, between the companies, if they were under common control. That's been changed now so that husband and wife, for instance, companies where they've got separate companies aren't caught as associated. They're only associated if they've got a real interdependence, a trade in transactions between the two. They announced all the tax rates for next year. They dealt with childcare exemption to make sure that for people joining the scheme as from April, whether you pay a basic rate, which be our higher rate, HR, or additional rate, AR, 20, 40 or 50%, then you basically get the same after-tax result. It's about £11 a week. They introduced the changes on alcohol tax that come into play. They talked about capital gains tax for companies. They talked about tainted charity donations. People were giving money away to charity, but they weren't really giving it away. They were getting something for it. And they didn't seem to like that. They talked about accommodation expenses of MPs, and I got all excited, as I always do. But if it doesn't do that, it just means that now they'll give expenses if an MP says that you've got to stay away. Exemptions for fees relating to monitoring services, really weird and wonderful. But there was more draft legislation. There was furnished holiday lettings accommodation, opening up to property anywhere in the EC, restricting the amount that you could claim loss relief, or how you could claim loss relief. Before you used to be able to write off against your general income. Now you can only, or from April you'll only be assisted off against other property income or firms' holiday letting income, and there's more strict qualifying rules. You've got to let the property now for 210 days, or it's got to be available rather for 210 days, and you've actually got to let it for 105 days to holiday makers. SDRT, no, it's not a typo. That's stamp duty reserve tax rather than stamp duty land tax. There are other types of stamp duty. They dealt with transfer pricing and all the usual suspect like tonnage tax. They changed like VAT for academies, splitting supplies and business samples. All very interesting. I don't know too. They changed oil taxation. They stopped the way some companies were using accounting standards to avoid tax on leases and loan relationships. They dealt with insurance companies, vehicle excise duty, so they set all those rates in play. They dealt with HMRC powers, one of which is the ability to legislate that someone has got to provide security for a page room that they honestly think may not be paid over to the revenue. That's quite scary. I mean, okay, they can only legislate when they think there's an honest chance that they won't get paid for it. Honest and revenue? No. They talk about third-party remuneration, which is, but the biggie, or the biggie certainly for the tax planning industry, was that they effectively ended EBTs, which are employee benefit trusts, and EFIRBs, which are employee-funded retirement benefits. Basically, they stopped those almost overnight because they brought legislation in December that would basically stop you doing anything before April, other than unscramble them. So that was, if you like, the draft legislation was part of the known unknowns. Known knowns, rather. The known unknowns were things we knew he was going to announce, but he hadn't announced before. They weren't many. They were the CGT exemption, We didn't know what that was going to be until yesterday. Well, it's £10,600, up from 10,100. Not a lot to get excited about. And the VAT registration limit, up from 70,000 to 73,000. You know, okay, 3,000, but it's not going to help a lot of people, is it really? And then I came on to things that should have been unknowns, but they'd already been leaked. In fact, I heard them on the radio yesterday morning, so they must have been true. I knew they were going to be in the budget, because everything you hear on the radio is couldn't have come out. There's the increase of personal allowance next year. They got it wrong on the radio. They said it was only 600, it's 630. Increase in fuel duty deferred, we knew that was going to come out. The increase that was supposed to take place in April. And I even heard he was going to levy aviation tax on private jets. So that was no great surprise when he did. But then, what did he come up with that was new, that was the trick? Because I'm sad enough to get excited by tax changes. And it's fairly dreary to know what's going to happen. So when I prepared a slide beforehand about the unknowns, and this was my slide. There was going to be no surprises whatsoever, but there were. So I was a happy bunny yesterday. No pun intended. You're going to consult on the amalgamation, not on the occupational and national insurance necessarily coming together, because as he says, he wants to keep the contributory aspects of national insurance. But he's talking about the operation of tax and national insurance. But as Francesca Lagerberg, my lecturer, said on Radio 5 yesterday afternoon, I think we'll all be retired before that comes about. Okay, we knew about the fact that he was going to probably do something about deferring, but what came as a total surprise, he slashed a penny off duty, and he scrapped the fuel escalator instead of having whatever we call it, a fuel stabilizer, which is basically, while oil prices are high, then he won't instigate the increase in petrol duty. Great, but when they fall, they won't. Now is he paying for it? He's actually paying for it by higher taxation of the oil companies. So let me get this right, you tax them less, or you tax them more, and they can't get as much duty, so they put the price up. And apparently when Danny Alexander, one of the Treasury Ministers, was approached and asked what were they going to do to prevent this, his comment was, well, they wouldn't do that, would they? We're going to watch out for it. EIS, when you invest in shares in a new company, usually they're new companies, unquoted new companies, the rate of release you got was 20%. Now you can get 30%, so that is a big increase. There were changes on company cars. The benefits were slightly amended. The fuel benefits went up. At the moment, if you get your fuel paid for by your company, then if you fuel for a company car, then you pay a percentage of 18,000. As for April, that would be a percentage of 18,800. The mileage rates went up. For the first 10,000 miles, you could claim for the use of your own car 40p a mile. As from April, that would be 45p a mile. But no change for after 10,000. The biggest change of the lot may well be entrepreneurs' relief, because that was changed umpteen times last year and ended up at the moment at £5 million of tax. £5 million of gains are only taxed at 10%. As from April, that will be £10 million. So when you sell a business, you can now get the first 10 million, which should look after most of us. Or look after me anyway. 10%. You reduce the main rate of corporation tax, but effectively not for banks. Because yes, believe it or not, you change the bank levy yet again. Because the bank levy has gone up to correspond for the fact that everybody else gets a reduction in corporation tax. So the banks get a reduction in corporation tax, but they get a higher bank levy. Capital outside short life assets and energy saving technologies, all the good stuff. Research and development for small and medium sized enterprises. Basically, the relief at the moment is for every pound you spend on research and development, you get relief on £1.75. As from April, it'll be relief on £2. So that's quite good. And they're making a big push on that. Petroleum revenue tax, they made changes to supplementary charge, and IFA, which is intangible fixed assets. I'm going to get it eventually. Come on, who knows what a UKIT is? Because I didn't before yesterday. It's a form of collective investment. But, wow. And they've made changes to gift aid so that people get more relief for their big donations. But there were even more unknown unknowns. He messed around more with the vehicle excise duty changes, the ones he published in December. He changed tobacco duty things he published in December, which was to basically tax hand roll tobacco as heavily as, you know, your roll-ups now taxed as heavily as other cigarettes. And he's basically changed lots of things on that. And then tinker with the usual subjects of aggregates levy, SDLT, stamp duty, land tax, bulk purchases. Before, if you spent £1 million on £1 million properties, you paid stamp duty on £1 million. Now, on the total consideration, what they'll do now is divide the amount you've paid by the number of properties you're buying, and you pay stamp duty based on that. So if one property was £20,000, then you multiply 100 times £20,000 and pay stamp duty on that. So it looks a good thing, but I'm not sure it is. VAT on, John knows all about low value consignment, whatever the R stands for. I can't keep up with all these stupid abbreviations. There's a whole raft of anti-avoidance, as usual. There was tax admin things, and then there was the OTS report. The Office of Tax Simplification was created in a fanfare, and I thought, oh yeah, they're really going to simplify it. But I actually, last December, I met some guys from the from the office, and they impressed me as really wanting to do something. I thought, yeah, but you might want to, but you're not revenue, are you? But lo and behold, the report actually says they identified some reliefs that were not required anymore, and they actually have abolished some of them this time. So it does look as if they've managed to get the revenues here, or the Chancellor's here. Right. There are two comments about yesterday's budget that I absolutely love. The first was by Miliband, who said that George Osborne was just Norman Lamont with an iPod. And the second one was by my daughter's boyfriend, who said, come on, tell me, what are they skanking off us this time? There are a few known unknowns, and I've just picked a few because I don't. If I told you all of them, we wouldn't have anything to speak about next year. So, right, we know there's going to be further changes to investment income scheme and venture capital trusts. We know there's going to be further corporation tax reductions, because, okay, we had the reduction that he introduced originally it was going to go down by 1% as from April. He put the rabbit at the hat saying it's going to be 2%, and we know then it's going to gradually go down, and the full rate of corporation tax will eventually be 23%. And I had a lovely email from one of my clients last night saying, I've been listening to the budget. I thought, oh no. And he said, they're talking about corporation tax being 23%, but I've only saved 20% for my tax. What am I going to do? I said, Chris, you're a small company. You don't need to worry. It's still 20% for you. And I made his night. We know they're going to increase personal allowance. They're going to go up by this massive 630. But the increased personal allowance is going to come with a reduction for higher rate taxpayers in higher rate threshold. So higher rate taxpayers don't benefit as great or to anywhere near the same extent as low rate taxpayers. And I don't know if I read this twice, I read this 3 times, I read this 4 times. Could have sworn that he said in his speech that high rate taxpayers would benefit this time. But it was there in black and white. A chance telling lies? No. IHT gives to charity. Again, very clever use of words in the budget speech. It said, if you give 10% of your estate to charity, we'll reduce your tax by 10%. And silly me, I thought, hang on, 10%? I thought that meant a 30% rate of inheritance tax. But it doesn't. 10% of the 40% you'd normally pay, so it really means you pay 36% in inheritance tax if you give 10% to charity. There's going to be an increase in the tax charge for non-domiciliaries. I put on the slide, which my spell check didn't like that, so I put non-domiciled individuals. They pay at the moment 30,000 for the privilege of being in the UK. As from April 2012, they can pay 50,000. There's going to be a statutory residence test. So at the moment, it's very unsatisfactory not knowing whether the person is resident or not, because they're running change their minds like the wind. They won't be able to do once it's written in statute. The deduction of tax from QTDs. Qualifying time deposits, QTDs, we've all got them, haven't we? Yeah. REITs, real estate investment trusts, SDLC, I can manage that one, stamp duty, land tax for first time buyers. They're going to introduce some relief for that. And they're going to get rid of more of these things that the OTS, the Office of Tax Implications, said they should get rid of. So they are taking it seriously. They still haven't abolished them all, but thank God some of them are quite provocative. The ones they're getting rid of, things like Millennium Aid donation, well, as he said, we won't need that for another 900 odd years. So. A carbon price floor. Yeah, well, exactly. Another suspect climate change levy is going to change that. He's going to increase that or reduce it depending on what you do. Landfill tax, another suspect. And my last one, apart from aviation tax, is enterprise zones. And that is a good time to hand back to John. He knows all about enterprise zones.
Because the second tenet of what the Chancellor wanted to talk about was to make the UK the best place to start, finance and grow a business. So what areas has he worked on? Chris is talking about taking away some of the tax reliefs and the tax things that really make life more complicated. So the Chancellor started talking about deregulation. And the first thing he's suggesting he's going to do is to not only bring in the one new regulation, you've got to take one out, is to work on dropping existing proposals for specific regulations which would have cost business over £350 million a year to implement. And one of those things is the right of an employee to ask for time off for training where the company employs less than 250 employees. If you think about it, for most of the businesses in this area, Mike probably would give me the number of how many employ more than 250 employees, but I don't expect you to give it off the top of your head. There aren't that many. There are an awful lot that employ less than 250 employees. So, and it's quite a thing for them to lose people if they demand time off for training. A moratorium exempting micro businesses and startups from new domestic regulation for at least 3 years. So that's until 2014. Isn't that great? You know, really small businesses will not be caught up by some of the stupid regulations that the rest of us are caught up by. They're going to implement the proposals from Lord Young's Health and Safety Review and launch a public thematic review to reduce the stick of regulation. And I thought I'd try and just read a bit out of the budget release on that. The presumption will be that all regulations identified as burdensome would be removed unless good reasons are given for them to stay. So presumably an MP or a bureaucrat that thinks, actually, my job will go if I lose that piece of regulation, will keep it as a good reason for it. Went on to talk about planning reform. One of the things I enjoy, and I know there's 1 or 2 people in the room that are involved in property development or property management, surveyors and so on, and lawyers that work in that area, is the mere problems we have with planning laws. It's some of the things I hear, I have to say I find amusing. I know they're frustrating to those involved, but they are amusing in the way they work. But we're going to now have a presumption in favour of sustained development, and that the default answer will be yes. Now, before you get excited, there'll be no building on a green field site, I'm sure. The NIMBYs will still be there. We won't get the bridge over the river through Beverley and Hallow, but never mind, we might get there one day. But there's going to be localised choice about development land when it's already been developed, so we can use it for different things. Pilot land auction model, starting with public sector land, all aiming to try and get more land going and being used for building and construction. And a fast-track planning process for major infrastructure applications. Do you think that the high-speed rail line will get built more quickly as a result? People in the Chilterns might argue, perhaps not. And consultation on proposals to ease the conversion of commercial premises to residential. I was delighted the other night. I was sitting in Evesham, and some of you may know we used to have an office in Evesham. And I looked at my old office. I was in the queue of traffic. I looked up at my old office and realised that somebody's now living there. It's their lounge. More importantly, work on startup finance and business growth. As Chris has mentioned, there'll be reform to the EIS scheme and to venture capital trusts. Clearly, that's going to encourage investments by entrepreneurs and by business angels into good projects. The tax relief, as Chris said, will move up to 30%, it's from 20%, and as the entrepreneurs relief will go up to £10 million. But the small business rate relief holiday is going to be extended for another year, which is going to help a number of retail, small independent retailers, especially in the market towns. Absolutely fabulous news for them. And the thing that Chris got a bit confused with was low value consignment relief threshold reduced from £18 to £15, and I did find out I didn't know what it was, so I did go and investigate what this was. And basically it might be stuffing up going to Jersey after November, because it means that that total price you can bring back without paying on an item, without paying any VAT when you bring it into the UK, will be £15. So if you bring in, I can remember the last time I went to Jersey, and I had to come back armed with presents for daughters and whatever, handbags and shoes and that sort of thing. Got it through without paying any VAT on the VAT. You're now only allowed £15 from November. Banking. Now, I did promise I wasn't going to really take the mickey out of the bankers this year. They've had a damn hard time, but there was some good news in there. And I really do think both Lloyds and the RBS have achieved their lending targets and, for business and mortgage lending, which I think is great news. As Chris has said, they've reviewed the rate of bank levy. They've increased it so that the banks don't benefit from the lower rate of corporation tax. Again, good news. And the third thing that came out was that the bankers' bonus pool has been reduced from the 2009 level. Again, good news. What about innovation? Chris has mentioned the research and development tax credits. Businesses in this area, particularly down on the Malvern Hill Science Park, will benefit from being able to claim extra research and development tax credits. And Chris has been, it's far too modest to say this, but Chris has been working hard with 3 or 4 businesses of late, looking at their tax credits and doing some great work recovering tax for them. Tax credit scheme will be simplified. We very much need that. Over £100 million to be invested in science capital development to provide facilities for the commercialisation of research, etc. And again, it's putting money into areas where we might benefit in Worcestershire. The third tenet was to encourage investment and exports as a route to a more balanced economy. I think many people of a certain, those of a certain age will remember exports was always the big push to get the economy moving. So on capital allowances, as Chris has mentioned, things like short life asset selection will be increased from 4 years to 8 years, and the business premises renovation allowance extended for, again, a further 5 years. Infrastructure, £200 million of new funding for rail projects. Over £100 million to repair the potholes that probably have bent a few wheels over the last few months. That's £100 million on top of the £100 million that was offered, I think, in January. And a national infrastructure plan. The national infrastructure plan will help construction industry plan further and invest further, have the confidence to invest going forward, because they will know in November what the plans are for the next 3 years or so, and then every 6 months the idea is to keep them updated. Trade and inward investment, the government are going to make permanent the letter of credit guarantee scheme that has, believe it or not, has been around for a few years but only on a temporary basis, and also the use of ECGD credits, guarantees rather, being used to raise long-term finance. Again, that's something they want to make permanent. Then we come to enterprise zones. Growth in all parts of the UK, I think, is how the budget presentation put it. But probably not in Gloucestershire, Herefordshire and Worcestershire. Because the first 10, 12 LEPs, that areas where they're going to have enterprise zones, Birmingham and Solihull, Leeds, Sheffield, Liverpool, Greater Manchester, West of England, Tees Valley, North East, Black Country, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, but no Worcestershire, no Herefordshire, no Gloucestershire. So the temptation will be for investors to move into, and businesses perhaps to move into those areas. Of course, there's London. London's going to have its own, presumably where Boris decides. Chelsea, perhaps, will be an enterprise zone. Notting Hill, I don't know. But there will be a competitive process to create 10 more enterprise zones from interested LEPs. So the onus is now on our local LEPs to work towards developing an enterprise zone. Personally, I would love to see one that was in Worcestershire, where we have the science and technology corridor down into the Malvern Hill Science Park. What's the benefit of an enterprise zone? You get a 100% business rate discount over 5 years. Business rates growth will be retained within the area and reinvested within the area over the 25-year period. I don't believe it, but there will be a radically simplified planning process. Some of us, I used to work up in the West Midlands, and when the Dudley Enterprise Zone came into being 25, 30 years ago, it must be now. Seems a long time ago now. Yes, they did it simplified. They built a shopping centre on the site of a farm just outside Dudley in Merry Hill. And then flattened the steelworks and put up some office blocks. Superfast broadband will be rolled out. That's probably why this part of Worcester has been excluded from the LEPs, because there is no intention, it's been a bit cruel that there's no intention of superfast broadband in this area. There'll be enhanced capital allowances and tax incremental finance to support businesses and ensure long-term viability. And of course, support from UKTI, which is the Trade, Export and Finance and Inward Investment organisation of the government. We have a regional growth fund, which every area I think has put bids in. Michael, correct me. I think there's 2 or 3 bids gone from 6 bids from this area, from Worcestershire. And the successful bids will be announced shortly, and on top of that they will then start a second round of bidding in April. And what are the changes? Well, there were changes to the environment. Chris has mentioned the carbon price floor, and I really have no idea what that is. I need to do some work on it. Climate change agreements have all been extended, and everybody is going to be encouraged and incentivised to take up the government's Green Deal. The government wants to be seen as a green government. I think that might have a few issues for them in the European Parliament, but let's go with the concept of a green government. And then finally, the fourth area was to create a more educated workforce that's the most flexible in Europe. So what are they looking at doing? The skills and youth employment, an additional 80,000 work experience places over the next 2 years, and then over 4 years, 50,000 additional apprenticeships. And the thing I really like is 24 new university technical colleges by 2014. That's going to go something if they're going to fund that in such a short space of time. For housing, again, reforming the planning system, so you can probably guarantee that that little plot of land at the end of your road will suddenly have a house built on it. Increase in the certainty of the construction sector that I've mentioned, where the government are going to come out with the plans. Programme of assistance for first-time buyers, clearly that will help get the market moving. We've talked about the stamp duty, the land tax, and the REITs, the Real Estate Investment Trusts, to make them easier to set up. Try and encourage people to buy to let. Now, obviously, banks will have to, are expected, one would imagine, by the government to come up with funding to help the REITs in their buy-to-let programmes.
I'm Mike Ashton, Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce, and it's always difficult following the programme that we have on the television all afternoon, radio this morning on the way in, and then a thorough performance by John and Chris. But I'll try and do my best and give an overview of where we stand as a Chamber of Commerce and the impact we think it'll have on local business. Let's just remind ourselves where we are. We're in a period of recovery and deficit reduction, and it is the government's job to create the conditions to enable growth and the creation of private sector jobs. Now, how are they going to do that? What's the challenge for this government? Well, the challenge is to balance the need for the plan in deficit reduction with a plan for growth, and this is what we are hoping to see yesterday in the budget. Obviously, the fiscal headroom is very tight, so the ability to do those things is also quite difficult. Over the last years, the Chambers of Commerce and the other business support organisations have regularly contacted their membership and used their national organisations. Chamber of Commerce is linked to the British Chambers of Commerce. We lobby our members, we find out what they want, and then we feed that into our national organisation, who then lobbies the ministers to try and have some impact on the decisions that they make. Particular things that we were looking at were employment measures. We wanted a review of the employment tribunal system. These are things that are identified by our members as key to them. Planning. Some people are quite excited about local enterprise partnerships and are still excited about it, not really knowing exactly where it's going to go yet, and we're still a little bit undecided as to exactly where that's going to go. But we wanted the local enterprise partnership to have a little bit more power. We wanted it to have a lead in taking enterprise forward. We wanted a presumption in favour of growth and job creation. We take that as read. We saw a number of fiscal measures that we wanted changing. Business rates, no to relocalisation. We looked at trade. The Chamber of Commerce leads the trade contract for Herefordshire, Worcestershire and Shropshire. So nearly every company that exports from our 3 counties will go at some time through our international trade advisor to advice or taking them to new markets. So there were a number of new things that we were looking for there. Increasing the trade promotion budget and introduction to export enterprise finance guarantee scheme. So a couple of things there that we were looking for. And obviously some of our bigger logistics people were looking for some decisions on fuel duty. 50% rate abolishment in this Parliament is another thing that we were asked to lobby for. So what were the positives that we saw from the budget yesterday? Well, there was a 1p reduction in fuel duty. That might seem a little, but some of the big companies actually have massive bills and that will impact on them. We saw a simplification of the tax system, and there are 43 tax reliefs abolished. Chris, you picked that up. 100 pages of tax code removed. That should help you next year, shouldn't it? We looked at other things that we were quite impressed and interested in. 250,000 more apprenticeships over the next 4 years. We see that as vital. Some extension of rate relief for small businesses, important. We were particularly impressed with the entrepreneur relief increase to £10 million. That is the future of this country. Growing new, high-tech, high-growth companies. We talked about Malvern Hill Science Park. Actually, they can happen across the whole of this county. My involvement for 4 years now has seen companies grow in the most amazing places to become actually the most amazing companies. And the 50% top rate tax rate, only a temporary measure, and that will be removed in the future. We did, however, have some concerns. We didn't see any real structural measures to address youth unemployment. Yes, there was the apprenticeships, but not the whole picture of youth unemployment. We didn't feel that there was enough there to catalyse consumer confidence, because the market out there is not confident about what's going to happen next. The media will report the bad news, and that seems to be their job, but they're not picking up the good news. So people don't feel sure about what's going to happen next. And the bad news at the moment is what's going to happen in the public sector, and people aren't sure how that will impact on them. Some people are, because they may be losing their jobs in the public sector. Will those jobs be replaced in the private sector? Some people think so, other people think not. And finally, we had a little concern about the recycling of some of the initiatives from the 80s. One of those was the enterprise zones. yes, there are 10 announced, but if there's going to be another 13, then maybe that for the first time gives the local enterprise partnership a little bit of clout in actually doing something that would benefit Worcestershire in the long run. So for sure, I would think that we'll be looking at opportunities to create a bid which will represent either the whole of Worcestershire or part of Worcestershire. And the Central Technology Belt runs from Longridge through to Malvern Hill Science Park, and Malvern Hill Science Park area itself with what's happening to Kinetic. There's certainly opportunities for us to put a strong bid together, we think, with that one. Conclusion, we would say broadly a positive budget. We think there's a number of measures which will significantly impact on businesses, income tax, national insurance contributions and fuel. And the consultations that they've announced, we certainly want to make sure that we, the business community, are part of that. And I know my colleagues in the other organisations will make sure that all of the businesses in Worcestershire are listened to and can play a part in that. And finally, what I would like to say is that as we develop this local enterprise partnership, we, the people involved in it as supporters of it, not the board members now, the Federation of Small Businesses, Chamber of Commerce and IOD played a very strong role in creating that and getting people engaged. The people are now engaged. There is a business board and a main board set up. So those three organisations there playing a support role. And I think as long as we can play a role, which means that all of the business community in Worcestershire can play a role to make sure that LEP represents what you want and can then take advantage of some of these government initiatives which could give us an enterprise zones or the benefits to Worcestershire. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Mike. That's, I think that's a very, very valid point and a very salient point. Sorry, I forgot your slide. The IOD has echoed really Mike's comments there. They support the budget and welcome various aspects of it. And I think it has been a very good budget for business in that respect. The Charities Aid Foundation Chief Executive, John Lowe, one of the comments Chris was saying about additional support on gift aid for large donations, actually for charities are helping them by reducing some of the paperwork that they need to put in on gift aid for the really smaller donations as well. So that's a very positive aspect to help charities, and that will go a long way. Sky News said Britain's open for business. That's a phrase I've heard from a number of people over the last 3 years. We are open for business, even when we've had some doubts whether they are. The CBI, John Cridland, said the budget will help businesses grow and create jobs, and the action that the government has taken, especially with regard to corporation tax, is welcome, but nowhere near the scale of what is required. That's from the Institute of Economic Affairs, which probably is one of the most negative points that I've read in the last 12 hours or so. Generally, though, my view is that small to medium-sized businesses have faced a very tough couple of years. It's been very difficult for them, so it's potentially good news that the government is seen to be trying to help them to grow, with the aim of aiding the economy's recovery and ensuring businesses can be sustained in the UK. Some of the planned changes could mean that there are some great positives ahead for some of this country's smaller enterprises. And I think it's down to organisations like the Chambers of Commerce, as Mike says, the IOD, Federation of Small Businesses, CBI, the banks, the accountants, the lawyers, the surveyors, all to help those businesses grow, especially in this area. We will all then prosper and benefit. But of course, the one thing I have to say is, sorry, I've forgotten the FT's comment, Osborne unveils a business-friendly budget. The one thing we have to remember, of course, is that the devil is within the detail. And I'd like to thank you all for coming this morning. It's been a delight standing and presenting to you about the budget. I hope you've got something from it. I did promise we'd try and finish by 9. Sorry about the slight overrun. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and don't forget, we want your bras. If you've got any that you want to donate, please drop them in at either our reception in Worcester or in Tewkesbury. We'd be delighted to take them. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.